Good evening, everyone. It is so nice to be involved with the Kansas Oil Museum and the Butler County Historical Society. Now, normally I give these speeches in person, but obviously in the COVID area, we're not meeting in person, so on Zoom is really the best way to do it. I'm happy to do it, happy to be here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Hatteberg's People segment that I've done for years, both on Cake Television and now on KPTS Channel 8 here in Wichita. The Hatteberg's People segment actually started in 1974. Now, I began at Cake in 1963, but in 1974, the general manager of Cake TV came to me. His name was Martin Umansky. He was a wonderful man, a visionary, really, in the broadcast business. And he said, "Larry, we're getting a lot of feedback on the stories that you do, so what I'd like to do is to franchise them," which simply means running them on the same day at the same time. And back then it was on Sunday night during the 10 o'clock news. And he said, "We want to call it Hatteberg's People." And I said, "Martin, let's call it something else. Calling it Hatteberg's People sounds real egotistical." And Martin was a tall, imposing man, and he bent down and looked me directly in the eye and he said, "Larry, we're calling it Hatteberg's People, and the reason we are is because I sign your paycheck." End of story. So, from 1974 clear to the present right now, it has been called Hatteberg's People. And it's really been a gift to me over the years. All of the people who I've done stories on have become like teachers about life. And I have learned so much from all these people. It's almost as if I have a doctorate degree now in life from all these people. So I want to take you on the road with me to the little town of Troy, Kansas. It was back in around 1995. I got a call from a reporter friend of mine with the Topeka Capital Journal, and he said, "Hey, Larry, got this great story that I think you would love to do." And I said, "Well, why don't you do the story?" And he said, "Well, the guy threw me off his land," which is never a good way to start a story. Anyway, so he told me a little bit about this individual, and I thought, sounds like a great story, but I could tell that this story was going to be different than most of the Hatteberg's People stories that I did. Normally I do a lot of research on these stories because we want to make sure that the person we put on the air is who they say they are. And in this case, I couldn't call the guy on the phone, I couldn't write him a letter, I couldn't set up a time to meet him. You just sort of had to show up and be there. And that's what I decided to do. So here I am in the little town of Troy, Kansas in Donovan County, that's clear up in the northeast part of the state. And I'm at this little convenience store just tapping people on the shoulder saying, "Excuse me, can you tell me how I can get a hold of Ernie Dittemore?" Well, every time I said the name Ernie Dittemore, people would look at me funny. Well, people look at me funny anyway, but they would look at me a little funnier when I said the name Ernie Dittemore. Finally, this one guy says, "Yeah, I can tell you how to get to Ernie's place. You know that old gravel road about 3/4 of a mile outside of town? Well, you take that gravel road, you go north about 1.5 miles till you get to that big oak tree that has all the branches pointed east. Well, then you go west another 1.25 miles till you get to the dead weasel in the road, and then roughly you're at Ernie's place." Those were kind of the directions that I got. Anyway, they were clear enough, and I kind of knew where I was going. So I'm out in the country, and it's a very different country than down here in central or western Kansas. Down here, you can see past the fence post. Up there, you can't. It's very forested and hilly. So I'm driving around trying to find this place, and all of a sudden I come to an area which looked like what the guy in town had described. And all there was a little tiny country lane. A car hadn't been down it forever, but there was a little tiny track, and it did look like what the gentleman had told me about. So, parked the car, walked down the little country lane, and I came to basically a wire stretched across the ground. Wasn't an electric fence, but it seemed to be a property line. And I may be from the city, but I'm smart enough to know you don't want to cross any property lines. Might be somebody with a shotgun out there. So anyway, I stop here and I look around. There is no building, there's no outbuilding, there is no house, there is nothing. No barn, nothing. Just big tall trees and debris and the outside. So I thought, perhaps I've wasted my time. I'll do the only thing that I can do, really, and that's call out his name. Maybe he's around here and he'll hear me. Hey, Ernie Dittemore. Ernie Dittemore, you out here anywhere? Nothing but the Kansas wind. So I waited a few minutes, thought I'd try one last time. Ernie Dittemore, you out here anywhere? Then, way off there, just between the trees, I all of a sudden see movement, and I see somebody coming towards me, almost like they're getting up, and I see one big walking stick come up, another big walking stick come up, and I'm now watching this old man walking towards me in a shuffling gait, one walking stick in front of the other. He's getting closer now, and I can tell kind of what he's wearing. And he has on the old farmer bib type of overalls. He has a really old, kind of a ratty looking flannel shirt on. And he has the big Elmer Fudd type of black galoshes unbuckled, even though it hasn't rained for a week and it's 90 degrees outside. That's what he was wearing. He's getting closer now, one walking stick in front of the other, and he's coming right up to me. On his head, he has a little cap that's pulled down all the way over his eyes with just the eyes cut out. And as I'm looking at this guy, he looks a little scary. Well, he is now right up to me. We are eye to eye and nose to nose. And the old man says, "You looking for me, boy?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am, if you're Ernie Dittemore." And he said, "I am." And I said, "Yes, sir, I'm looking for you." And he said, "Well, you found me." We talked small talk for a couple of minutes, and that old Ernie reaches down, and that little stocking cap device that he was wearing, and he pulls it off in one fell swoop. In all my years of doing stories with people, I had never seen a dirtier face. His face was absolutely caked black with dirt, layer after layer after layer of dirt. And you had to stare at this face. You just had to. You couldn't take your eyes off of it because you've never seen anything like it. And I was reminded that what my grandmother told me years and years ago. She grew up on the prairie, and she said, "Son, now be sure and wash behind your ears and in your ears, otherwise something will be growing in there." Boy, she was right. Things were growing in Ernie Dittemore's ears. Finally, the old man got tired of doing the small talk and came to me and he said, "You want to see where I live? How I live?" And I said, "Sure, that's exactly why I came up here." And he says, "Well, follow me." So I followed him down an old dirt path that he had worn on the 80 acres of land that he owned outright in Doniphan County. And we went probably a city block or so, and we came to this clearing, and in the center of this clearing was just burned wood and other debris. But you could tell that a house had been there and had burned down. The old man took those walking sticks and he climbed up on top of that debris and he plopped himself down. He says, "See this, boy? This was my house, burned down 40 years ago." And I said, "Really? That's hard to believe." "So, Ernie, where is your house now? Because I don't see another house around here." Old Ernie looked at me and he said, "I'm getting to that, boy. I'm getting to that." You see, you didn't hurry a man like Ernie Dittemore. He had his own timeline. And when he was ready to get up, he would grab those walking sticks and pull himself up. And he climbed down from that pile of debris. And we went deeper into his world and deeper into his life. As we were walking down his next path, we came to this little pasture. And in this pasture was just debris. There were rusty tin, there was broken glass, just paper, trash, you name it, it was in this pasture. Over here was a pole sticking up out of the ground, about the size of a broomstick pole. The old man walks over there and he takes one of those walking sticks and he taps that pole and he says, "See that pole there, boy?" "Yes, sir." "Look to the left. Do you see that hole in the ground right there?" "Yes, sir." "That's where I live now, in that hole in the ground." For the last 30 to 40 years, Ernie Dittemore had lived like an animal in a burrow. He lived in a 4 by 10 foot hole in the ground. It had been covered by tin, and there was a little entrance where you pulled up a little trap door, and he could get himself down into that hole in the ground. I wanted to go down there, but I couldn't because my hips were too large. But Ernie was a very slight, thin, snake-like old guy, and he could wiggle his hips and get down there. I couldn't do that. But I could get the television camera in, and what the television camera saw, there was his bed, and his mattress were leaves, just a bed of leaves. That's all it was. There was a little ratty blanket that you could tell that he had covered up with, and then there were 3 buckets. 2 of the buckets contained sugar or salt, and the 3rd bucket contained human waste. In the wintertime, Ernie would take that bucket of human waste and burn it inside that hole in the ground to keep warm. Because the insulation properties of dirt are very, very good and doesn't take a lot of heat to heat a hole in the ground. Our forefathers figured that out years ago when they built sod houses out on the prairie. When you see a man living in a hole in the ground, it really boggles the mind because you and I, we don't live that way. We live in a normal house. Ernie didn't. And when you see a man living in a hole, it really is stunning. So I looked at Ernie and I said, you know, I don't think you have to live this way, do you? And old Ernie looked back at me and he said, no, I don't have to live this way. I want to live this way. And I said, that's the thing I don't get. Why does a man want to live in a hole in the ground? Old Ernie looked at me, shook his head, and walked off. And I thought, well, I've ticked him off at this point. But really, Ernie had to go away to get some thinking time because he had this stupid guy from the city who he was trying to explain his life to, and it wasn't working very well. After about 5 or 8 minutes, old Ernie comes back and starts to talk with me again. And he talks to me much like a kindergarten teacher would talk to a 5-year-old. He said, you know, boy, I don't have much learning. I went to a 1-room schoolhouse about 1.5 miles from here. But he said, you know what? Teacher gave me a book once, and in that book it said that this country was about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you know what, city boy? And then he punches me in the chest pretty darn hard. You know what, city boy? Punch. I'm happy. Is that okay with you? And I said, Ernie, that's great. That's absolutely wonderful, and I'm glad you're happy, but I'm sorry. I still don't get it. I don't understand why a man lives in a hole in the ground. Once again, Ernie looked at me, shook his head, and walked off. This time he was gone for quite a while. After a while, Ernie comes back, again starts to talk to me, very patiently. And he says, hey boy, you ever watch the sunrise? And I said, no, Ernie, I'm pretty busy. I don't have a chance to watch the sunrise. Old Ernie just shook his head. He said, every morning I get up and I watch the sunrise. And he said, you know, after the sun gets a little higher in the sky, the critters start to come out. And I got these 3 wild deer that'll come right up and eat corn out of my hand. You ever look in the eyes of a wild thing? And I said, no, Ernie, I haven't. He says, there's nothing like it. And then he said, sometimes I like to take my hand and I like to dig it deep into the earth and I like to feel the earth between my fingers. And then when the clouds billow up and it starts to rain, I like to run my hand down the side of a tree and feel the wetness of the bark. And I like to see the rain on the petals and the leaves and the flowers. And then at night, city boy, you know what I do? No, sir. I watch the sunset. Bet you don't watch sunset either, do you, boy? No, Ernie, I don't. I'm just pretty busy. Again, old Ernie just shook his head. Ernie Dittemore is a man you meet once in a lifetime, if you're lucky. If you're lucky. And I was a lucky guy. Ernie Dittemore wasn't a man living in a hole in the ground. He was a teacher about life. And he was teaching me so much on that hot afternoon day. So I'm talking to Ernie, and I've been with him now several hours, and we are getting along really well. He's enjoying me. I'm enjoying him, and I feel that I can really ask him anything. So I said, Ernie, did you ever have a girlfriend? You know, were you ever in love? And he looked at me, got this toothless smile on his face, and he says, no, probably a good thing, don't you think? Yeah, Ernie, it's probably a good thing. And then, because I was downwind of Ernie much of the time, it is a fair question. Ernie, when was the last time you had a bath? And Ernie kind of scratches the side of his face there, and little debris comes off. And he says, oh, I suppose it's been 20, 25 years since I've had a bath. Trust me, you believe him. There's no question about it. Ernie Dittemore is also the first man I ever met where the shirt and the skin of the neck were growing together. I had never seen that in a human being before, but I saw it in Ernie Dittemore. Well, the sun was starting to go down pretty rapidly, and I had to get back to Wichita. It's a 4-hour drive from Donovan County back to Wichita. And I told him I was going to have to be getting on the road, and he said, wait, I got to show you one more thing, wait. So he takes me deeper into his world, deeper into his life, and we come upon this little dilapidated shed. I wouldn't call it a building, it's more of a shed. Windows were blown out, the door was lying flat, and we go in, and it is the last thing I expected Ernie Dittemore to have. Ernie Dittemore had an airplane, a 1946 Piper Cub, single seat, fabric-covered wings, wooden propeller. Now, the elements had long since taken the fabric off and the termites had gotten to the propeller, but old Ernie walks up to that, what's left of that plane, and he grabs that rotted propeller. He grabs onto it with that old, wrinkled hand, and he says, you know, it needs a little work, but I could still fly it. And when you hear him say that, and when you see him grab that propeller, you know he probably could. But the question is, Ernie, what'd you do with an airplane? And he said, well, after the big war, and he's talking about WW2, after the big war, an old boy stopped by and wanted to know if I wanted to buy it. And I said, well, that's really the question, is why did you want to buy it? And Ernie said, well, you know, I'd be walking out in the pasture on a pretty day, and I'd look up and I'd see the ducks and the geese and the hawks fly over, all the other birds. And he said, you know, just once, I wanted to see what the birds saw. So I taught myself to fly, and I only flew like treetop height and just really around my property. But you know what, boy? I saw what the birds saw. And one day I just parked the aircraft, parked the plane, and that was it. I didn't need to fly anymore because I saw what the birds saw. Ernie Dittemore was a treasure, really a treasure. And I get a lot of questions about this story. Somebody asked me once, how does the guy eat? Where does he get his food? Well, that's an interesting question. He had a good friend that lived a couple of miles away, and once a week that good friend would stop by. Ernie would give him cash money to go into town. The friend would buy him canned food and bring it out to Ernie, and then Ernie would eat it. Once a year, that same friend would stop by. Ernie would give him cash money to go into the courthouse to pay the taxes on those 80 acres of land. And they'd had that arrangement for all of those years, all of those 4 decades. So that's how he ate, and that's how he got food. Now, there are people like Ernie Dittemore in every community. My job as a photojournalist and as a journalist is to listen to those people. And I was lucky. I got to listen to a man who lived in a hole in the ground because he was teaching me about life. Others aren't. Many times people like Ernie Dittemore are simply ignored because people think they're nuts, and he wasn't. Ernie was not on welfare. He was not on any type of federal assistance or any type of federal handout. He paid his own way. And that's because before his house burned down, he was a farmer. And if he made a nickel, he didn't spend it. He kept all that money. There he was, living on those 80 acres of land like a hermit alone in Donovan County. So I left Ernie, and we drove back. I drove back to Wichita. Long drive, but I knew that I had something special. I had seen someone special. We put the story on television, got a lot of feedback from it. A lot of people wanted to know more about Ernie, more about his life. Well, about 6 months after I did that story, they found Ernie's body on one of the many paths that he had walked on his land. But the interesting thing about Ernie was he was more popular in death than in life. They had one of the biggest yard sales they had ever had, estate sales, I guess, in Donovan County. Some 500 to 1,000 people came. And on his property, they found old covered wagons, they found sleighs from the 1800s, and antiques that antique hunters would absolutely kill for. Again, more popular in death than alive. But Ernie Dittemore really touched my life. And I'll tell you why. The other reason for all of the things that he taught me, the other reason is I meet a lot of happy people. I'm a happy guy. Ernie Dittemore, though, was the first person I have ever met in my life who was not only happy with his life, but absolutely, completely content. As I say, I'm a happy guy, but I would be hard-pressed to tell you I'm content. I mean, the new iPhone comes out, you got to have the new iPhone. Gosh, the new shirt over at Von Maur, you got to have that new shirt. Want a new house? Sure. Take that. New car? Sure. Ernie was not into that at all. Ernie wasn't into that because Ernie had the sun rise and the sun set. I was a lucky guy. I met Ernie Dittemore, the man who lived in a hole in the ground and the man who changed my life. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to me. I love telling stories. The Hatteberg's people has been a great gift to me over the years, and I'm honored to share stories like Ernie's. Thank you.